Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Week 2 of Season 2 content is wrapping up in a handful of days, and this has been a very pivotal week for so many players out there looking to gear out the main with some of the best gear imaginable, and it's only going to get better from there. Between all of the new gear that you can get from your weekly vaults, but also all of the gear that you can grind while grouping up for some more raids and more dungeons. However, not everybody has access to group play, as some players are either forced to or choose to play solo. Whether you're trying to avoid others and would rather make progression all on your own, not relying on everybody else, or maybe a hectic life schedule keeps you from being able to commit to a raiding group, forcing you to pug all of your Season 2 content. But there's so much content that so many solo players can still squeeze out of Season 2, and that's exactly why I want to put this guide together, showing you how to maximize your gain as a solo player to get up to a 670 item level all by yourself. Unless you count somebody helping you craft an item through the work order system. I mean, you have to do legwork to get the items for it anyway. They just get to put them together. You could go full self-found with professions all on your own, but that just makes things harder than they need to be. But let's still go over how to gear efficiently as a solo player within Season 2 content. As always, if you guys want to see more guides for the patch 11.1 Season 2 stuff, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. Before we dive into this guide, let's first define what a solo player is, because depending on who you ask, everybody's going to have a different definition. For some, solo playing means you're playing with no other players involved at all. You don't want to rely on another player whatsoever when it comes to getting your character geared, so you're not looking for group content at all. You're trying to do as many activities as you can to earn the most amount of loot and rewards from this season, without having to wait on another person or rely on anybody else to be completely self-sufficient. While for others, there are solo players as in they don't have a raiding guild or a group of friends or a group to do Mythic Plus with on a regular, so they're kind of stuck pugging open world content and instance content and raids, but you're willing to pug that stuff and you're willing to rely on others. You just don't have a consistent group that you could just jump into immediately. This video will primarily focus on pure solo, not reliant on other people type of content, but I will mention a couple of puggable things here and there as well to add some supplementary activities that you could dive into while mingling with others at a limited capacity. Bare minimum, you should at least do the world objectives and world quests available from Kaz Algar, whether it is the Archivist, whether it is the world quest objectives with Lothar, or if you're doing maybe the Delve weekly. And there's also a variety of different events out in the open world, which you should do at least a little bit of. Every single one of these boxes will contain things like weekly cash with materials to upgrade gear, so Valor Stones and some of the entry-level crests, gold, which is useful for enchanting new items, but also buying materials to be able to craft gear, which is very important. The first 2 of these will contain veteran track gear. The first 4 will contain restored coffer keys, which are used to get into delves, and doing the main weekly objective within Kazagar also awards you more sparks to be able to craft more gear, which is going to be one of the avenues that we'll be utilizing in order to really maximize as much item level out of our characters. So these are definitely recommended and are a must. At the bare minimum, you should do the main Kazagar event, and then 4 other activities that reward you also more of these boxes, at the bare minimum 4. But the more of them you do, the more Valor Stones, crests, and gold you can get out of them, and it's a decent bit, and all of those resources can go into fueling that character. We have a bunch of variety of other world events that can be used to supplement all that gain, from the theater within the Isle of Dorn. We have the Awakening Machine event in the Ringing Deeps, the Hallowfall event with the Spreading the Light. We have the Ashkahet, the leaders of that main faction. Once you choose to serve one of those leaders, you could do a couple of world quests and objectives in order to gain reputation with them, and that also rewards you boxes. In Undermine, we have ourselves the Surge Pricing event, so whenever the event is active, ride around, do a bunch of activities, do a bunch of odd jobs within Undermine in order to be able to get an extra box. Then you also on top of it have special assignments, which are available in the rotate from zone to zone every few days. Doing 2 world quests in a zone unlocks a special assignment, finish the special assignment, also grants you a similar box, very similar to what you get from your weekly. So there's a lot of things you can do just out in the open world baseline in order to be able to get a lot of new items. But also, besides this, bare minimum, you should also do the new world boss that is available in Undermine. While the gear is kind of randomized what the boss can drop for you, it is still really good items. As all of these pieces, even though let's say you're a priest, you maybe end up getting leather gear, plate gear because all of it is warbound. Maybe your alts can use it. Sometimes you may be able to chance on items that your character can use as well. This is definitely worth doing on every one of your characters because the gear, especially if you play multiple characters, can be helpful. It's not a guarantee that it'll be helpful, but World Boss gear never has been a guarantee, but at least it's another chance at loot, and you should try to do it on as many of your characters as possible. Plus, the currency from the World Quest is also very good, and sometimes it can coincide with some of the other events that you could solve within the Kazargar weekly events. Now, if you're not against Pugging content, you should also do the time walking events whenever they are available. The weekly events can actually be really good and fairly easy to do if you're trying to get a little bit extra gear. Mr. Pandaria, time walking is active this week, and for doing 5 time walking dungeons, which you can do so easily, just queue for it as in your role. Usually you get pretty fast queues with these being fairly popular. You get a cache of Undermined treasures, which can be any item from the current raid Liberation of Undermine, with any of the bosses and any of the items that only will potentially being a drop from that box. Even though all of these items are champion track, the items from the raid are very strong, and there's some of the best trinkets and rare items you could potentially loot from this, plus a variety of weapons with additional shadow damage, which any DPS will find a gain in. Even if it's some like your rogue, you can put it in your offhand, and that could still be very valuable, even though lower item level, as these items generally do perform and sim really highly, so it's definitely worth doing them when they are available. You should also pay attention to any time walking dungeon events from the expansion of TBC, Wrath, or a Cataclysm, as those time walking weeks come with its own raid. Inside of those raids, you can get a lot of champion track items, potentially from every one of their bosses. So if they have Wrath of Lich King time walking and you have the raid of Ulduar, every one of these bosses has a chance, there's a lot of bosses, to drop your champion track items from that instance. There's a ton of different encounters for you to collect lots of loot from, and potentially even mounts. It's another chance for collectibles, but also to gear out a character. Inside of those raids, there's also a quest to defeat the final boss of that instance, mostly for those raid time walking weeks. So Kata, Wrath, and TBC for Ragnaros, Yaxaran, and Illidan himself. For defeating the final boss, you get one of the items on any of these bosses as a random drop in hero track quality. And getting the actual time walking raids done, Pugging wise, you would think that would be difficult, but there's no gear requirement for it. Everything is scaled down for your character, so you could just jump into it with any group. You don't need the highest item level imaginable. It's mostly just mechanics, but on like a handful of them, and just about any group can defeat any one of those instances. If you're a pure solo player, that means you don't want to be playing with anybody else or reliant on other players whatsoever. Majority of your time will be spent within delves in order to gear out all of your characters, which is some of the best content out there for any player that just wants to dive into content and even select higher difficulty content for some very solid rewards without having to wait for others, as you are accompanied by Bran, who is actually surprisingly helpful, especially if you can set him up correctly with the right role and with the right set of curios. But first you need a bunch of keys in order to be able to get into delves. The 4 objectives that you get to do from the weeklies, from your weekly boxes, those will award you 4 keys guaranteed. The rest you have to get either from world quests in order to unlock crest or key fragments, in order to, once you have 100 of them, to combine them into a coffer key. Also, running through delves allows you to obtain these radiant echoes that can be used at a world soul memory. And when doing a memory, most players are recommended to do 5 of these memories at once, so you can do like different difficulty of these runs. You could either do a single memory at a time, or you can do 5 at a time to get 5 times the rewards. And as long as you're efficient and clearing objectives, which is mostly slaying enemies and fighting the bosses and completing events, then you should be able to get a lot of shards, but also a lot of valor stones. But yes, delves will be a primary way for you to be able to get gear as a pure solo player. Tier 8 rewards award you champion track items with every single run from bountiful delves, and anything above that also still awards you champion track gear, but slightly different crest rewards. Tier 8, 9, 10, 11 now actually have scaling rune crests that award you from 2 to 4, 6, and 8 from the 8, 9, 10, 11. Defeating the Nemesis or allies, which are new goblin and hobgoblin enemies that you'll find throughout the delve that are kind of like the henchmen of the underpin. Those enemies actually, if you defeat all of them, clear out the entire delve, also award you more crests at the end of your run, which means they're definitely worth defeating if you want to get more crests to upgrade all of your gear and items. Through delves, you can also get hero track gear from maps. However, maps are not a guarantee, but they are a bit of a bad luck protection element to them, as the more delves you run, eventually your character will stumble upon a map, which if you use the map, then defeat the final boss of a bountiful delve, you'll get an additional box with some hero track loot inside of it. So one of the ways to get a map is to just run a bunch of delves until you eventually get one, and you should run these ideally on a tier 8 and above so that the map can actually be one of the better maps with better hero track upgrades. Another way to do it, however, will be to spawn the underpin inside of the delve with a Wave Scrambler 2000, an item that you can get from Merleton for 2000 undercoins, or something you could actually loot from some of the smaller treasures all throughout a delve. It's a very low drop rate, but players have reported that it actually is dropping. It's just a very lucky for you to be able to loot one immediately when you run the delve. However, if you're really looking to maximize those maps as a solo player, you should also use them within higher tier delves, as they'll award you gilded crests, which allow you to upgrade some of the best, some of the top tier gear, but also craft some of the strongest gear available in the game, as you get more gilded crests from that map from higher tier delves. So even if you do loot the map on a tier 8, if that is the highest you can do, go ahead and use the map right there. But if you could somehow successfully complete a tier 11 delve, you should save the map for those. Speaking of tier 11 delves, which is the hardest difficulty of delve, those also award you gilded crests. So a normal tier 11 delve will drop you 7 gilded crests 3 times a week. So you need to complete, ideally, 3 tier 11 delves in order to get the most amount of gilded crests from those runs, 21 crests maximum. And if you use a map during one of those tier 11 bountiful delves, you'll also be able to gain up to 10 additional gilded crests a week. So if you're really looking to maximize your crest gains from delves, you should ideally get a map and then use the map inside of a tier 11 delve to get the most amount of value for those currencies. And while gilded crest can be used to upgrade some of the best of the gear available, which is hero track that you can get from delves, you could also save it for crafting items, which can actually be way higher in item level, which we'll talk about in a bit when it comes to a crafting section. However, if you're somebody who's going to be a solo player, you can only get so many gilded crests from delves a week, with a cap of maximum potentially 31 if you're really min-maxing those tier 11 delves with a map. This makes up only a fraction of your weekly cap, but the rest of it, if you are inclined to do pug content, you could get from Mythic Plus dungeons. Probably a lot easier to get into the Mythic raids. For Mythic Plus dungeons, you want to dive into +7s, or at least work your way to a +7, because at the end of the run, whether you time the key or don't, you get more gilded crests from those keys. So from there, spamming +7s to cap out on your gilded crests to get even more of that currency cap is what you'll want to do if you're someone who is privy to playing with others. Technically, with Mythic Plus dungeons, if you're someone who is really good at the pugging environment, and you can make your way up to a +10 eventually, as you get more score, as you get more gear throughout the season, that's gonna get easier. This is where you can start to get some of the mythic gear, not from the end of the run, but rather as a weekly reward, which we'll talk about when we discuss the Great Vault system. But at the very least, it gives us a clear objective. Go for +7s to get our gilded crest capped if you are looking for that cap, and do +10s eventually for some mythic track items for some of the potentially best of the best gear of the season. Next, let's go over crafting, which is where I think if you're a pure solo player, this is where you can get the most amount of consistent gear for your character. When it comes to crafting gear, we get a fragment of a spark once a week. Last few weeks have been a little different. We got a lot more of them regularly, but normally you would get half a spark every week. So you can craft a new item normally every 2 weeks or so, which allows you to create some of the best gear available using gilded crests that you get from either delves or Mythic Plus dungeons, as you can convert 60 of them to enchanted undermine crests, which allows you to craft items up to 675 item level quality, which is pretty massive. If you're someone who's a pure solo player and just gear through delves and want to get your gilded crest through delves, you get about 31 gilded crests a week that way. So every 2 weeks you should be able to hit that cap of 60, transform those gilded crests into an undermined crest in order to be able to craft some of the highest item level gear available. Alternatively, you can use those gildeds in order to pump up all of the hero track gear that you get from delves. But if you're looking for some of the highest item level gains, honestly, I think crafting will be the best way of going about it. However, if you're someone who is fine pugging, you can get gilded crests, like we said, from Mythic Plus dungeons, and then you can use that to upgrade some of your items while still being able to craft a bunch of pieces just about every other week. But for those of you that are pure solo players, being able to craft guaranteed items is massive. And what I mean by guaranteed is that you can actually determine specific item level for it. If a crafter can guarantee the item level of the item, then it's going to be a guaranteed item. Don't need to roll for it or find it randomly inside of a chest. As all the materials you can buy, you can just purchase with gold that you get from weekly events on the auction house in order to craft these pieces. Plus, you can also dedicate specific stats for the item, so you don't need to roll on random stats. If, let's say, haste versatility or crit mastery are your best stat, you can guarantee that that item is going to have those stats. You can even add extra embellishments, which are going to be different from class to role to different specs. So those you might want to reference a class guide for some of your best in slot crafted gear, but at the bare minimum, crafting a weapon early on, massive boon. Being able to craft other items that aren't tier set pieces, so belts, bracers, boots, any of the items that are lower item level, or even rings or a necklace for huge boosts to secondary stats, those can be massive. And that's plenty of items for you to collect slowly over time with some deterministic loot. No need to play around the RNG of looting a great item at the end of a run. You can work towards those items slowly over time to get yourself some of the highest item level pieces available out there for this season as a pure solo player. This is why I really think as a pure solo player, without any others to help you on your journey, really should consider crafting, as anybody can take advantage of the work order system. You don't need to craft the items yourself, just as long as you can find a crafter that can make it for a reasonable price and you get the materials for it. You should be able to make some deterministic loot roughly every 2 weeks from the amount of gilded crests you can get from delves, but also from the sparks that you get every single week. Then I want to talk about the weekly vault as well as the catalyst a little bit. Basically, with the vault, the way that it functions is thus. The more activities you do out in the open world, or the more delves you complete at a higher difficulty, the more items you can fill out with your vault. Same the way for the more dungeons you run or the more bosses slay in a raid. So ideally, you want to try to fill out this vault with as much as possible because it gives you more choices of items that you can collect at the end of the run. But the biggest gain of why you want to fill out a great vault is because it can give you tier pieces for your character, and tier items on a character are massive, as these bonuses, while they don't have too much variety with the 2 set, be one that's for healers, for tanks, for range DPS, and melee DPS, the 4 set is impactful enough for every single character, making healers better at healing, tanks more sturdy, and DPS more deadly. And they're definitely worth getting, and one of the best sources for you as a solo player will be from the Great Vault specifically. Another way to get tier gear is through the Catalyst. Any of those item items, helm, shoulders, chest, legs, or gloves, can also be turned into a tier set gear, taking a basic item from Season 2 and then transforming it into a Season 2 tier set version. Now, the catalyst charges are limited. It is something you gain every second week ever since the reset. So every other week, you're expected to get a catalyst charge. Ideally, I would try to convert hero track items bare minimum into tier set gear if you're looking to get the most amount of gain for the season. While the actual tier set bonuses, in most cases, don't scale with the item level of that item, you don't really want to convert a champion track item to then have to get a hero track version later down the line. So try to wait until you have a hero track item to turn into a catalyzed tier set, so then you could be set in stone with a very, very powerful item that you're most likely not going to be replacing for the season. But as always though, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this solo player guide. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very, Very much appreciate it. Also, join our Discord community, especially if you want to keep up with all the newest updates happening for 11.1 Season 2 content, or if you got any more questions as you're trying to make your way through gearing a character. Either somebody will be knowledgeable enough in order to pinpoint you to like what stats you should craft on an item, or which direction you should go in your character, or at least give you resources to keep you better informed. We try to keep the place as friendly as possible. Also, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.